We are skipping our usual info today to jump straight into something absolutely fascinating. Today's explainer plunges us into a brilliantly dense, grimdark parable centered around two completely contrasting figures. On one side, we have Alara, a meticulous cartographer. On the other, Sir Brain, a sovereign figure wielding an immense amount of personal will. Through their incredibly intense philosophical exchange, we're going to explore a dangerous illusion we all face, the illusion of absolute isolation and what it actually takes to share reality. It's a masterful exploration of existential themes, all mapped out like clockwork. Okay, let's dive right into this. The source material kicks off with Sir Brain asking Alara to explain the mechanics of a role she's perfected, a role she calls the honest guest. And he's very direct. He doesn't want her title, he wants the operational ratios. Her response is just stunning. She says, "I enter contested space without claiming ownership of the tempo or the frame." This perfectly sets up the philosophical tension right from the jump. Alara is outlining this incredible discipline of observing and existing within a reality without trying to dominate or control it in any way. She goes on to describe the honest guest as a mechanical function of continuous external continuity. Now let's unpack this dense philology for a second, because it completely flips how we normally think about solitude. What we're looking at here is a concept akin to the seventh solitude. For Alara, solitude isn't about, hiding away in a dark room somewhere. It's an active, highly mechanical practice. She maintains an independent ledger that neither a denser will nor a residual will can ever fully overwrite. She remains entirely herself, entirely objective, precisely because she refuses to dictate the story. And this brilliantly illustrates the deep contrast between these two. On one hand, you have Alara's independent ledger, defined by mechanical precision, unvarnished truth, and her function as the honest guest. On the other hand, you have Sir Brain's self-mastered current. He carries this sovereign will, fueled by what the text calls dark fire, and he is seeking absolute autonomy. It's literally an ideological duel between the clockwork sovereign who desperately wants his will to dictate reality, and the cartographer, who understands that reality is a shared, inescapable space. To really grasp what Alara's doing, we have to look at her operational ratios. Sir Brain realizes pretty quickly that her role as a guest isn't about being a companion in some warm, sentimental sense. Not at all. It is a structural refusal. She is structurally refusing to let any single conjugation, any single person's narrative or sheer willpower become the sole remaining surface of record. She is effectively the ultimate failsafe against a single version of reality taking over. Let's look at exactly how she pulls this off. She describes her methods with the same cold precision she'd use on faulty escapements in a clock. She maps by touch, pulse, and residual signature before any narrative is even allowed to form. She keeps her soft error deliberate and infrastructural rather than accidental. Think about what that actually means. She absolutely refuses to validate the map via the subject being mapped, and her role ends only when the page is deliberately closed or the last measurable pressure finally ceases. It is a perfectly cold, active practice of independence. Listen to her exact phrasing here. It's so powerful. The moment I require the subject of the map to validate the map, the mechanics fail. She tells Sir Brain that the absolute independence of her ledger is the entire method. I want you to reflect on that for a second in your own life. How often do we compromise our own independent ledger, our own grasp of what's real, by seeking external validation from the very people or situations we are trying to understand? The moment we ask the subject to confirm our reality, our independent mechanics completely fail. So let's move into the physical space they are occupying and see how this plays out. They turn together toward these deeper rows of dual-grown trees that hold four specific inscriptions. The setting itself, this garden, is essentially a living experiment. It's right here that Sir Brain begins to speak of the garden's revealed secrets. He's starting to acknowledge that what he genuinely thought was entirely his own private domain is actually something vastly more complex. We can actually trace the path toward this emergence chronologically as Sir Brain lays it out. First, the temporal library seeded the original corridor. Then, 3 dark fire coils and his own later inscriptions accelerated a hybrid growth. But, and here's the kicker, he realizes this growth was never purely his to begin with. Finally, a force called absolute zero measures the final convergence. Sir Brain recognizes that his illusion of total control is breaking down. What he assumed was just his private soft error was actually becoming a shared, inescapable space all along. Let's just sit with that third phase for a moment. The text emphasizes that absolute zero has already measured the convergence. There was a real, heavy atmospheric dread here. Absolute zero acts as an undeniable, completely neutral measuring force. It has this immense cold weight to it. It doesn't care about Sirbrain's sovereign will or his self-mastered current. It simply measures reality exactly as it is, entirely canceling out his private illusions of total dominance. And as this massive realization hits him, the environment reacts. Alara adds the data her instruments have been capturing ever since a new structure, called the Tower, began its emergence. She notes that the concealment field of the garden doesn't just answer to Sirbrain anymore. Actually, scratch that. It never did. It now answers to 3 distinct residual currents all at once. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the Forest Guardian treats this environment. The concealment field is being influenced by Alara's synthesized pulse, Sirbrain's self-mastered flame, and a third, entirely separate force, the Shadow's independent movement. The garden takes these distinct, incredibly powerful forces and treats them as a single arithmetic. It perfectly blends the magical, mystical elements of this world with cold, hard, mechanical data. This mystical convergence happens step by step, proving that absolutely nothing in this garden remains unilateral anymore. First, violet springs begin to register the gravitational signature of the distant Obsidian Sea. Second, the destinies of pure land and the mechanical garden mathematically merge into one shared existence. And finally, almost as if to prove the point, the dual-grown leaves of the trees shift in one coordinated motion, acknowledging the completed exchange. The environment itself validates that they are, without a doubt, in a shared reality. Which brings us to a massive, challenging question. Is absolute autonomy actually possible? Sirbrain thought he had it, right? He carried the self-mastered current. But the garden proves him wrong. It makes us ask the exact same thing of ourselves. We so often try to maintain total unilateral control in our own private worlds, our own metaphorical gardens. But is that ever really possible? Or is every space we occupy always influenced by the gravity of others? This realization finally hits Sirbrain, and he speaks it aloud. Testing an inscribed trunk with his staff, he literally feels the living synchronization answer him back. He says, the garden is no longer a private soft error. It is contested infrastructure. So the crucial point is this. The great secret of the garden isn't some hidden arcane magic. It's the incredibly open fact that every major force has already left a measurable trace inside the exact same soil. The garden has become a common ledger, written in physical growth rather than script. And Alara's detector confirms this with a low, steady tone. She summarizes her ultimate critical purpose right here. The function of the honest guest is to ensure that this contested infrastructure, this common ledger, is never claimed by the majority control of any single flame or zero. She is the ultimate guardian of shared reality, preventing total domination by any one perspective. As our analysis draws to a close, we reach a profoundly moving final scene. The High Time continues its arrival all around them. Between the Sovereign, who carries the self-mastered path, and the Cartographer, who carries the independent ledger, the garden now stands firmly as shared evidence rather than conquered territory. They are existing on 2 continuous surfaces that simply no longer require secrecy to remain functional. Neither traveler moves to magically resolve the larger convergence. Instead, they both continue the only mechanics that have so far completely refused cancellation in this new shared reality. Those mechanics are accurate description, deliberate soft error, and the absolute refusal to close the page while any pressure remains legible. They are choosing to witness and exist within the truth of the contested space, rather than frantically trying to overwrite it. This dark, incredibly rich parable leaves us with a haunting realization about the spaces we all inhabit. We are all living in contested infrastructure. Every single one of us leaves traces in the soil. So I leave you with this final thought. If your reality is a shared ledger, whose measurable pressure are you currently trying to overwrite? Take a moment to think about the honest mechanics of your own life. Until next time, keep mapping your reality.